In a small town in upstate New York, on a cold snowy day a baby boy was born, and not too far away in another small town a baby girl was born at the same time. Both parents felt pure joy and happiness to bring a child into this world. The baby girl's father said this, as he held her. He said, "This is a blessing from God that our baby girl was born at 3:33 a.m. and it's a sign of goodness and what's about to come for my baby girl in life." Her mother laid in the hospital bed, crying with happiness as she heard her husband say that, for he is a man of God, and she knew her husband was right when he spoke as he did. A week passed and they left the hospitals when they both wanted a real fresh cup of coffee. Both parents left the hospitals not knowing what was about to happen. Both couples took their babies home. They would cross paths in the local town coffee shop. Both parents stopped in the New Way Lunch for a cup of fresh coffee before they got home. New Way Lunch had the best hot dogs in all of New York State. Both couples couldn't help to notice the babies. They started off with introducing their names. One couple said, "We are Sandy and my husband's name is Dave," and the other couple said, "I am Linda and my husband's name is Matthew." They both sat and they started to talk about what they just went through, and how happy they are to bring a child into their lives. The parents of the boy said to the other parents, "This is our handsome baby boy James." And the other couple said, "This is our beautiful baby girl Maria." It was small talk. They talked about what hospital they were at. James' parents said, "We were in the Glens Falls Hospital," and Maria's parents said, "We're coming from the Saratoga Hospital." They all sat there having small chat when both couples said their goodbyes to each other and parted ways. The two would cross paths again later on in their lives. When they were both 5 years old, they started school in the same year, at the same school, Queensbury Middle School. They seen each other as they went through school in the hallways, but never talked with each other, only if they had to in class, in plays, or in gym class. In Queensbury High School, Jim started to play football and soon everyone knew his name, because in his junior year he became the school's star quarterback as he played football with the seniors. Everyone knew he would be a star quarterback for any team in the NFL. He had a talent to play football like no other his age. His coach knew that the NFL scouts would be seeking him out someday in college, and everyone in school wanted to be friends with him. Jim grew up in a very rich family. Even though his parents were rich, Jim didn't grow up with a silver spoon in his mouth as many have with rich parents. His parents wanted him to learn the value of a dollar bill and to respect it. Although his family was very rich, Jim was down to earth and he only had a few good friends that he would hang out with. He knew if he ever became arrogant, his father would knock him down a peg, or if he ever put a chip on his shoulder his father would surely knock it off, and if his head ever went in a cloud his father would bring him back to earth in a heartbeat. Jim listened and he would respect his father's words and wishes. Jim never got into dating girls throughout high school, as most of the boys in school had girls on their minds. Jim didn't, and throughout the school year he would see Maria at times, either in the hallway or in the cafeteria. During lunch, they never had classes together, so they really didn't know one another throughout their school years. Maria wasn't active in school, Jim was. She would hang out with a small group of girlfriends during and after school. If anyone saw Maria, they would see her girlfriends with her, and that's how tight they all were after school. Jim had one friend named Kenny he would hang out with after school. They were best friends ever since first grade. Both Jim and Maria were straight A students and they never got in any trouble. All the teachers respected them both. It was this way all the way up to where they were seniors in high school, when in the year 2020 was the first day of the school year. At Queensbury High when they met, they were both seniors in high school. They both knew each other from school, but never talked to one another, until that first day back at school from summer break. They bumped into each other in the hallway, and as they looked at one another they both knew it was love at first sight in D-Wing. Jim could only nod his head as they looked at each other. Maria had a smile on her face as Jim nodded to her. At that moment they didn't say anything to each other because they were with their friends, who they haven't seen all summer, but they looked at each other with the desire in their eyes. The bell rang, and as they passed each other, their eyes locked as one. He spoke as they passed, saying later. She replied maybe. They went to their classes. As they went to their first class, they both kept on thinking about each other. Their friends nagged them both as they were in class about what they seen with them too in the hallway. When the bell rang they both went into the hallway looking for each other. as they walked to their next class. They didn't see one another until lunchtime, when it happened. Maria sat in front of the window as the sun was shining off her golden red hair. Jim couldn't take his eyes off her as she sat there, wondering where he was. His best friend Kenny teased him, saying, "If you don't get the nerve up and go to her I will," as he had a grin on his face. "Really look at her, buddy, she's beautiful is all I am saying." And at that moment Jim knew if he didn't do or say something right then and there he never would, or his best friend would, so he got up the nerve to walk over to where she was sitting with her friends, and he said, "Hello, I am Jim and I have to tell you that you're beautiful and your beauty is stunning." As they both stared at each other, it was love at first sight. They both knew it and they could tell by the way they looked at one another. She asked him if he would join her, and he sat down next to her. She told him her name. "I am Maria, it's nice to meet you, Jim," as her friends laughed and giggled about it, saying, "You go girl." Her best girlfriend, Paige, said it's the catch of the day. They sat eating their lunch and talking. When the bell rang, she said, "I need to go to math class." Now he said, "I have math also." "Whose class are you going to?" She replied, "Mr. Smith class." He was in shock and said, "That's my class also," as she smiled with a laugh. And she said 1 + 1 = 2 and not 3, as her and her friends all laughed when she said that. As they walked down the hallway, she reached for his hand. He didn't pull away. They both sat next to each other in class. At the end of class he handed her a note that said, "Meet me after school on the football field," and when she read it, her heart skipped a beat for a moment. She smiled with joy. Just then her friends surrounded her and asked her, "Well, girlfriend, tell us, is it love at first sight or just lust?" One said. She replied back with, "I may kiss, but I never tell," with a laugh. One said, "Oh girlfriend, seeing your smile says everything, you are in love." As they walked to their next class, she received a text message from her mother as she was walking with her friends. The news was not good. The message was to come home as soon as possible. She texted, asking why, and she got one back saying, 911, come home now. She knew that text meant something terrible had happened. Her heart dropped as she ran down the hallway and out the door, heading home. Her girlfriends all ran to Jim as he was pacing around as if he had something on his mind, and they told him what they had just seen and heard. They told him where she lived, and Jim just said, "I'm going to be with her." He looked at his best friend Kenny and said, "Please tell my teacher what happened and I had to leave school." Kenny told him, "Buddy, I got your back, and I will let our teacher know what happened. Now go to her." Then Jim ran out of school, heading to her home. Maria ran all the way home, about 1 mile from school. When she arrived at her home, she seen many cars in her driveway and on the road. As she walked towards her home, she seen the ambulance, and she froze in place when she seen her mother standing on the porch crying with tears running down her face. Maria couldn't move with her hand over her mouth as tears ran down her face like a waterfall. Her mother seen her fall to her knees and ran to her, hugging her as she said, "It's your father, he had a heart attack, and he's gone, my baby girl." She screamed out in pain that her world just ended, as she cried in pain on her knees with her hands over her face, crying, "Oh no, mommy, no, it can't be, mommy, not my daddy. Please tell me it's not so, please, mommy." And at that moment she felt someone hugging her and her mother. She cried in this person's arms, not knowing who it was for a while, when a boy's voice said, "I will always be here for you no matter what." Her eyes opened wide and her head lifted only to see Jim holding her and her mother. She leaped into his arms and said, "How did you know?" He said, "I felt your pain and your friends told me where you lived, so I had to come to you. And here I am." As they hugged, both cried, her for the loss of her father, Jim because he could feel her sorrow and pain. Her mother could only stand there as she watched this boy holding her daughter as she cried. A few moments passed when Maria said, "Mom, this is Jim we met in school today." Her mother was shocked because her daughter would never talk to any boy. "And now I see that she's in the arms of one," her mother asked Jim to hold her tight and don't let her go. "I need to go back inside the house and do what I have to." Maria said, "I am coming with you, Mom. I want and I need to see my daddy. Please, Mom, let me see him." Her mother looked into Jim's eyes and said, "Mister, you don't want to ever hurt her, and you don't want to let her go. Hold her close to you and let's go inside." They all walked to the front door leading into the living room. When inside, her father was already on the stretcher with the sheet over his body. She ran over to him and fell to her knees as one of the EMTs pulled the sheet down from his face. Jim felt her pain as he ran to hold her as she cried in pain. She cried out with tears running down her face like a waterfall, "Daddy, your little girl loves you, Daddy. Why did you leave me, Daddy? I can't live without my daddy." As she placed her hand over his heart, that alone got everyone in the room to weep in tears. Her next statement shocked everyone in the room, her mother, the family members that was there, and Jim. She said, "Look, my daddy, I have a boyfriend, he's here, Daddy, his name is Jim, Daddy. He will never hurt me. I'm your little baby girl, Daddy. I love you so much, Daddy. You're my world, Daddy. I know he won't hurt me or Mommy, Daddy. The tree of life will live on, Daddy, with true love." This tore Jim up as he wiped the tears away to say, "Sir, as God be my witness, I will never bring any harm to your baby girl, nor will I let any harm come to her, sir. I will lay my life down to protect her and your wife. I will only love and honor her till the end of time, sir, for I love your daughter." Sir, you could have heard a pin drop. It was that quiet in the living room. The EMT said, "We need to go now." Jim lifted her to her feet and pulled her away, hugging her so she couldn't see what the EMTs had to do to cover his face and leave with him. Her mother hugged both her daughter and Jim as she said, "Welcome to our family." By that time school had let out and all of their friends stood outside on the sidewalk. They seen the EMTs drive off with a body but not knowing who it was. Maria's mom saw all their friends outside on the sidewalk and told Maria and Jim they were there. Maria looked into Jim's eyes and asked, "Will you please walk with me?" He replied, "I am not leaving you. Let's go. I have you." As they walked out to their friends, some of them were in shock seeing Jim holding her as her mother stood in the doorway into the house. They all hugged her and gave support to her as Jim told them it was her father, that he had a heart attack. They all had the look of sadness in their eyes when every one of her girlfriends surrounded Jim and said, "If you harm her in any way, we will hurt you, buddy." Paige said as she looked at him, "You will pray to God if you hurt my sister, so you better not. Only love her because she's an angel." Jim told them all, "Why and how can I hurt the love of my life?" They said, "Well, don't if you want to live." Jim said, "We all will become good friends because I love her." After a while of talking on the sidewalk, Maria's mother came out and said, "I am going into town to do some things and I'll be back later." She offered them all to go into the house and help themselves to whatever they wanted. They all started to go inside when Maria's mom pulled Jim to a side and said, "I am Linda. I love my daughter as I see she's in love with you. Now, mister, listen to me. I trust you for some unknown reason. Please keep an eye on my baby girl and all of the friends who came here for my daughter. Please." Jim looked into her eyes and he said, "Yes, ma'am, I will, and you have my word I won't let her go, ever, and I will keep an eye on everyone who is here." They hugged each other and she went into town to deal with her husband's arrangements for the funeral. The family members who came to the house all left when Linda did, so it was just Jim, Maria, and their friends at the house. When Jim went back to hold Maria as they walked back to the house, when Maria froze at the door and cried as Jim held her tight into his chest, she didn't want to go back inside at that time. She cried out in pain, "I want my daddy. I need my daddy. Why did you leave your baby girl, Daddy? What am I going to do without my daddy? I love you oh so much, Daddy." As her tears ran like a waterfall down her face, as her friends heard her words, they all felt her pain and sorrow, and they all gave her a group hug. Her best friend looked into her eyes and said, "My best friend, you're like the sister I never had. I feel your pain. I will always be here for you as your sister and not as a friend. And sister, I know someone who loves you." Maria looked at her and said, "You think," with a giggle as Jim then looked into her eyes. He wiped her tears away as one tear ran down her face. He kissed the tear and said to her as he looked into her eyes, "I will always kiss your tears away no matter what." Maria wrapped her arms around Jim as they held each other for a moment. Then her sister girlfriend Paige said, "Okay, you too." They looked at each other. Maria had a sad look when she asked her what. Maria looked at her and she said, "Girlfriend, we all are fishing for a boyfriend. And girlfriend, you never went fishing and this fine fish jumped into your boat." That brought a little joy to Maria hearing her best friend say that. So they all sat on the porch showing support to Maria until they all had to go home, all but Jim.